Moses, the prophet shepherd, Aaron, the priest shepherd, David, the king shepherd, and then Jesus, the great shepherd. And I'm not going to talk in order necessarily. I might mix them around a little bit, mix them together to try to bring you a picture of the power of an influential shepherd leader. And then just maybe the different parts of how those leaders function or how they should function. Now, it's interesting to note that the Bible tells us, I think Paul tells us, that you are a prophet, priest, and king in Hebrews. We are all three of that as God's children, as redeemed children through Jesus. So it gives us more responsibility than just being a priest in the Old Testament. We are to be all three, a prophet, priest, and a king, to live out what God has called us to live out. Now, I'd like to do this together, the Shema thing. The Shema is the Hebrew for Hear, O Israel. The word Shema means to listen, hear. And there's 4 levels of Shema that I'd like to talk about sometime and incorporate this in and see, then to remind us or to ask us which level we're on. 4 levels of hearing. Shema means to hear. So if you want to stand, and then I'll say a line and you repeat it after me, do you all know the Hebrew? Does everybody know the Hebrew? Some of you know the Hebrew, some don't. So let me just say the Hebrew, and then I'll go through and say the Hebrew the first time, and then I'll come back and I'll let you repeat it after me. After I say a line, you repeat it after me. It goes like this. Okay, does this pointer work? It doesn't. I got 2 here, so maybe one will work. Yeah. Well, it fades out up there. I'll start. The first one is Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. B'chol levavka, uv'chol navshaka, uv'chol meodecha. Ve'ahavta le'ra'acha kamocha. Amen. Okay? It's like talking German, isn't it? Almost. All right. So for us that know German, we can get the guttural sound a little bit better, but for those that don't know German, it's much harder and it's okay. So repeat after me. Shema Israel. Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. B'chol levavka, uv'chol navshaka, uv'chol meodecha. Ve'ahavta le'ra'acha kamocha. Amen. All right. Now, I raised my little finger. There's a reason for that, because there's a few times in the Bible that the little finger shows up. Well, it doesn't. I shouldn't say the little finger. The finger of God shows up. It does imply the little finger. It's how mighty God is. He can do everything with his little finger. He can create a storm. He can create a flood. It's like with his little finger. So search it out. Find where it says the finger of God and trace it from the First Testament back to the Second, the New Testament, and see how they come together, how beautiful God wants to speak to us through his scripture. Okay, let's say the English together. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Amen. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down. When you rise up, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Amen. You may be seated. What I'd like to talk to you tonight is the power of the shepherd. And I said already about, the power of the shepherd and the 4 subjects I'd like to speak about: Moses, the prophet shepherd, Aaron the priest shepherd, David the king shepherd, and Jesus the great shepherd. And see how what they used and how they led through their lives that they were here. I gotta get this together because I got two computers here I gotta work. And you know, men aren't too good doing two things at one time. Women can do that, but men have a much harder time to do it. I'd like to start with the Exodus. It seems I've tried to talk about the Bible a lot, and it seems that often I just have to go to the Exodus. Why the Exodus? Because to the Jewish people, the Exodus is the most important story in the Bible, for those that don't know Jesus, because it's the story of deliverance. So the Exodus starts out of Egypt, and this is exactly what Jesus came to do for us as his people that accepted Jesus. He's taken us out of Egypt, out of sin, and brought us into him so that we could be the temple that he is. So the Exodus is the most important story. But there's another story that they say is the most impactful story. And that's the exile. The Babylonian exile was the most impactful to the children of Israel, never to go into exile again. They did because they fell away from God. Why did they fall away from God? They fell away from God because they stopped having Sabbath. At least that's to the rabbis. When they stopped the Sabbath, when they profaned the Sabbath, they fell away from God. So it tells me something. It tells me that we need to rest. Don't work 7 days a week. Actually, it says God worked 6 days and then he rested. I don't even like the word 6. I try to break it down to 5 anymore. But resting is important. Why is it important? Why did God want them to rest? Well, if we follow the story out of Exodus into the Sinai, Moses goes up on Sinai, and we know what God did. He gave him a tablet, which were the 10 Commandments, I call them the wedding vows that he gave to them. And then after that, he said, now you need a wedding chamber. So they built the tabernacle. God said, build the tabernacle, and he has 50 chapters explaining how to build the tabernacle. Why was that so important? I think it was because God wanted them to spend time with him. God was trying to have them have a relationship with his people. That's why he called them out of Egypt, to make them a great nation, to show the rest of the world the power of relationship. So God said, hey, at least one day a week, I want to date with you. It's date day, the Sabbath. Now we keep the Sunday, some people don't. I sometimes struggle. Should we maybe even keep the Sabbath, keep a Saturday? I think it's important that the principle of God's word follows us through life, or we follow that. Rest. Take a day and have a date with God. And I think the world we live in is probably, at least the American world, the riches and everything that we have, we are so prone to get sidetracked with all the cares of this world. At least I am. Trying to step away from a business, leading a flock, I haven't done well. I have messed up many times. I just started this week, I just started working only 3 days a week, and it feels like I'm almost out of jail. I can breathe again. I should have done this a long time. My son finally set me down and said, Dad, enjoy life. You don't have to work 5 days a week anymore. Thank you. I enjoyed that. I needed that. Excuse me. This thing is kind of not wanting to. There we go. Sorry, I thought the picture was up. I got to keep my eyes on this picture back here. All right, let's keep moving. This is how it looks in the wilderness. I love the wilderness. I love the desert. The desert has been, it's a rough place, but that's where God often speaks, or usually speaks to us. It's not necessarily God's land, but it's where God gave the children of Israel the word, the Torah. Isn't it amazing? So when you go through a desert, rejoice, because that's probably where God wants you to find some deep riches in Him. So He's taken them through the desert. He's taken us through the desert. All of us has been in a desert, I'm sure. But to me, this is one of the most powerful verses for me to think about the desert. When you're out there, we're to be shade. Somebody, if you're not going through a desert, somebody around you probably is. Be a shade. Be living water. Like this great rock. Be like this great rock for the person that's going through a weary land at this time. Think about it. That's who we are to be. We are to be, a man shall be as a hiding place from the wind, refuge from the storm, as rivers of waters in the desert, as the shadow of a great rock in a thirsty land. And we're in a thirsty land, a very thirsty land. That's how it looks. This is places where the children of Israel traveled through. It was hard. It was tough. But it was good. Well, part of it was, it took 40 years, but that's why it takes so long with us too. We mumble and grumble and complain, and so we just lost another year. Now God said, all right, it's going to take you another year. You didn't get the lesson yet. One more year, you'll get it. It's taken me 58, and I'm still learning. It feels sometimes like I'm here yet, learning the steps that I should have learned a long time ago. Let's look at David. How David led as a shepherd. And Psalm 23, I'm going to go through this pretty fast because I want to get to the others. But Psalm 23 is just a beautiful picture. But this is David leading this is not David, but it is David leading a flock of sheep. I don't know, it doesn't say that David had a donkey, but this one has a donkey. You can see the donkey in the front and the herd of sheep coming in the back. Just a beautiful line of sheep. And this shepherd, the key about shepherd leadership is, and these shepherds are always talking to the sheep. They're making a guttural sound of some kind, or they're saying something. And the sheep will go off to the right, and they'll say something, and the sheep will come back. They'll go off to the left, and they'll say something. It's amazing to watch these shepherds lead sheep, and actually goats as well. There's goats in this flock. We'll talk more about goats later. This is the pasture land. For those of you that have been in Israel, you know how it looks out there. This is Judean mountains. It's the pasture land. The wilderness is on east. It's not pasture land in the wilderness because nothing grows there. Just tufts of grass grow here. So there's where he leads those sheep, and he pastures those sheep. Now, this is here. That's how we like it, isn't it? It's like having our bank account, a thick bank account. You have all the money you need. Now you can, and this is how we like it. This is not how it is in Israel. Not where in God's land, I see it completely different. He gives you enough grass for today. And David knew exactly where to take those sheep as shepherds do today. We went with a flock of goats and sheep when we were there this last summer. But there you can see a little bit these blades of grass. Now they're dried up here, but at night the Mediterranean air comes in, the moist, cool air comes in, and the heat of the desert, they meet, and it causes condensation. The condensation will run down over the rocks, and little blades of grass can come up overnight. Have enough moisture to get little blades of grass, and they say they're very high in protein. And so these sheep and these goats nibble along the way. There again, this is the grazing land of our shepherds, way back in ancient times. Now, has it changed? They're not sure. It could have, but we don't know for sure. How do these sheep follow a shepherd? Why do they follow a shepherd? I don't see shepherds beating sheep. They have a staff. Now, usually, I should have brought mine along. The staff they have is one with like a knob on the top. Now, they have a crook. There are some of that as well. But the knob, I think that staff is to beat away the predators. It's not to beat a sheep. Now, I've seen shepherds with sheep tied to their donkeys because they would just wander away. And if they don't obey, eventually they will kill the sheep. Because if a sheep wanders away, the tendency of the young are to follow that sheep that's wandering away. And if he just doesn't learn his lesson, he goes to the butcher shop. So how do these shepherds lead these sheep? Shepherd leadership, what I have found, is all about influence. It's how we influence is how we lead. The people that are closest to my heart are the ones that influence me the most. I listen to those people because they know my heart. I know what they're saying when they're talking to me. They influence me a lot. And you do too. Shepherd leadership is not about power. It's about influence. It's about talking. It's about nurturing. It's about establishing relationships. And I watch those shepherds. It is amazing. They'll be out in front of the sheep and they'll be talking, and the sheep will just follow. And then they'll say something and stop, and the sheep will just spread out and start grazing. The sheep will never lay down until he's full. They'll keep grazing, they'll keep moving. Now, my flock that we had this year when we were there were a flock of goats. Every last one was a goat. This is the stuff they ate. And I watched them, it's thistles. They nibbled at this stuff, but they knew what was good and what was not. They just ate some of the stuff and they left the other go. Sometimes they even ate the dead stuff, like some of it looks very brown. That's what they were eating. But the shepherds knew where to take them. Now, when we started up this mountain, we looked up the mountain. It was, I think we walked 6 miles that day and 15,000 steps. They do that every day. Way down yonder, to the left, there's some huts. That's where the sheep are kept at night in the sheepfold. Shepherd leadership or leading is hard work. Anybody that has is a mom and dad knows that it is hard work to shepherd children, isn't it? It's hard work to shepherd a flock anywhere. But it's enjoyable work when we do it with influence, with love, and care. They want to follow. With courageous leaders, get people to follow. And that's what these shepherds do. The other thing that is important about shepherds here is the voice of the grandfather is still heard from these sheep. Now, they've trained their children and grandchildren, and the grandchildren are actually leading, but it's actually still the voice of the father, the grandfather, that the sheep hear and follow. And that's kind of like us as well. A story. We were over scouting one time, and we sat on top of the mountain above Qumran. And we sat up there, and we found this verse. As we were sitting on the edge, I jumped down over the ledge. It was maybe 3 feet high. I just jumped down over the ledge, and there was a stone. And on the stone, this verse was written. This is just, to me, the beauty of the shepherd. How Jesus, if you let him into your heart, how he wants to guide you. So this verse, Isaiah 49:10, there shall not hunger or thirst, neither scorching wind nor sun strike them, for he has mercy on them, will lead them. And even by springs of water will he guide them. Isn't that a beautiful verse? This man was sitting below us, and he got his teapot out, and he started a fire, and it was windy. It was amazing to watch him start a fire. One little match is all it took to start a fire, and it would take dozens of them for me because it was windy. The wind was coming up over the beautiful day, and it seemed like this old Czech came out here, and he just wanted to enjoy the sun. You can see he's been in the sun a lot. He sat there and he started a fire, and so I had jumped down off the ledge. I had seen that verse, and we started walking away. Then I said to Vernon, it was Vernon Beachy and myself, and I said, Vernon, do you think we should go down? So we stood there contemplating, do we have time? And yeah, we have time, let's go. So we started down, and he comes like this, come. Because when you enter their realm, you become their friends. That's the Bedouins. So we came down, and he said, sit. He could talk just a word or two of English. So we sat down, and he was boiling this tea on this teapot. Let me just go to the next one here. He was boiling this tea. And we sat down, and then he had a big bag that he unloaded from his donkey, and he goes and reaches into his bag, comes out with a beautiful tomato, 2 of them, and gives one to each of us. Then he reaches back in his bag and gets a big cucumber, about an 8-inch cucumber, and breaks it in half and gives us a piece of that. And he reaches back in and gets one of their pieces of bread that they make this huge tortilla-type bread. It's good stuff. And he rips it in half, and we have lunch. Exactly what that verse had said. And we sat there, and he wanted to talk. We showed him pictures, and we had stuff we had some snacks from the States, and we reached in our bags and got these snacks out and gave it to him, and he thought the world had just exploded in front of him, and he was so happy. And when we left, just before we left, my canteen water was pretty full, but Vernon's was almost empty. And he drank a little bit of water, and he said, "Water?" Vernon said, "Please." And he fills his bottle with water. That's the shepherd we serve. That's how he wants to lead us, if we can trust in him. And this is how God showed up that day. This old man, not a Christian, but I think it was God teaching us a lesson of hospitality that day. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Now, this isn't necessarily still water here, but this is the water trough. This is how they would, when we were there this summer, they took him to the water hole or the spring. There was another one, there was a spring, a well in the ground that they would take the bucket down and draw it up. I thought of Rebecca, I thought of Moses when he came over to Midian, how that he chased the shepherds away and a little bit of that was going on here. There was actually a fight. I didn't see that. Burnell, I think, saw that. I didn't see the fight. Two shepherds fighting each other it's just a normal thing, I guess. But he brings us to living water. He does. As we go through the desert, he will give us living water. He restores our soul. There's always a shade tree somewhere. Well, I shouldn't say always. But God in our walk, if we trust him, will give us shade, he will give us water. And there's an Ecclesiastes, I'm not sure where is it written, that it says that he never saw his children lacking bread. Isn't that interesting? Let's move on. Now the next one, I'm going to have a little clip. If you can have the sound on this next one. I want you to watch this. So this is the true shepherd, I think. When we wander away, or when someone wanders away from the flock, how do we treat that person?
The Bible tells us that sin is choosing our own way so that we can do what we want rather than following God. And that sin is what separates us from God. And the penalty of sin is death. A lost soul is helpless. And therefore, the only hope that a lost soul has to live is if its shepherd will seek it out, find it, and rescue it. death to life.
Did you notice the sheep? When the shepherd was coming, it didn't move toward the shepherd until the shepherd came to the sheep. And the picture I get from this is it's the word Baruch. He could have beat the sheep because the sheep was running away, but he didn't. Baruch means to bless. And when the shepherd goes down to that sheep and starts petting the sheep, even though it ran away, even though it was rebellious, the sheep wanted to follow. That's David, the king shepherd. That's Jesus, the great shepherd. And us as under shepherds, can we do that? To bless somebody is to bring yourself down to the level of a person. To bless them. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is the pastures he takes us through. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. For your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, this isn't the picture in the evening, but this is what happens when dusk starts to settle. The shepherd takes the sheep and starts talking to those sheep, and they come around him, and he walks with the sheep to make sure they don't go somewhere they shouldn't. And he talks at a different tone. It's amazing to watch the shepherd. And he takes them into the sheepfold. Thou preparest the table in the presence of mine enemies. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is the beauty of what happens when we walk with him. I like the cup of blessing. I'd just like to touch that quickly here. The cup of blessing this is my interpretation. Now, you don't have to go here with me if you don't want to. The cup of blessing to me is God has given each one of us a gift. And he says, exercise it. Exercise the gift, and I will keep filling it. It's like when you drink tea over there, when they give you tea in the Middle East, you drink it all, and they'll fill it again. You drink it, they'll fill it. You drink it, they'll fill it. They'll keep filling that cup as long as you drink all of it. And in a sense, it struck me one day as I was studying, in a sense, that's what God wants to do for us. Exercise the gift, and I will give you more. I will keep blessing you. But then we stop. It's like if you want to be a great basketball player, you just practice a half hour a week, never get it. Or you think now you're good enough, you can taper off and stop, you'll lose out. So exercise that gift that God has given you. Let's go to Aaron the priest shepherd. What did a priest do when a priest was here? What was his duty? One of his duties was, he was like the mediator. He was to put God on display. He also was to bring the sacrifice. Interesting picture here with, I keep forgetting. Interesting picture here with Aaron the priest. He was to bring the sacrifice. So you had to prepare it right. You had to make sure it was right. You didn't want a lamb with blemish, especially not for for the whole nation of Israel. So you had to be careful with what you chose. So I think the priest shepherd is the highest calling of all of them. Jesus, the great high priest, he showed us why. What is it that makes it so important? This is part of it. It's a life of sacrifice. When you go, the trips we do things on purpose in Israel to make it hard. Well, this last trip was really hard. And it was the first 4 days, most of us were we were dragging every day. Especially about the third day, we climbed Mount Hur, which was the highest mountain in Jordan. And it was warm. But something happened. But the priest, the biggest challenge about the priest shepherding is a sacrifice, is your sacrifice. How much do you sacrifice your life for others? How important is it to be a sacrifice? Well, I think that's just bottom line what it is. Even the shepherds would put the ladies on the donkeys so they wouldn't have to walk. Even the shepherds understood that. Bedouin shepherds. It's a beautiful picture of how we're to walk. Aren't you sometimes tired of sacrificing your life? Wouldn't somebody else do it for a change? Don't you feel that way sometimes? I do. I think that's a sin. If we're to be a priest, not after the order of Aaron now, after the order of Aaron, he brought the sacrifice. Now it says in Hebrews, we are to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. That is, meaning you are the sacrifice. We get to be the sacrifice. Are you excited about that? You don't bring a sheep in or a lamb in to sacrifice it. You are it. And I'm wondering if that's not one of our biggest problems in America today. You know, and I'm caught up with this as much as anybody. I like to go to the drive-thru and I don't even want to wait on my coffee when I get there. I'm trying to check myself almost every minute of the day. Just relax. Just relax. It doesn't have to be now. Actually, we do things on purpose sometimes, so it isn't just right now. Just wait. That's the patience of these shepherds that I watched at the watering trough. The patience that these guys had. It was amazing. And I come back home and I want everything right now. That's a picture never does justice to anything. But that's where we climbed the day when we were walking with, or the Aaron thing. So remember, we're almost at the top. But before we got there, as we were walking through here, we had a session talking about the sacrifice of Aaron. And I wish I'd have a recording of it. I do have a recording. Behind me was a goat. And as we were talking about the sacrifice, when George was done, George the Young was our leader. When he was done, he nodded his head, and the Bedouin shepherds behind us took the goat, laid it on its side, and cut its throat. And that's what you see here, the blood running down over the stone. What did that goat do that he had to be killed? He wasn't guilty of anything. But he became the sacrifice for a lunch. The day before, he was with the flock of other goats. But this day, and that's exactly what Jesus did for us. And that's who we are to be, is to, maybe not that, well, yes, that too, is to give our lives for Jesus. It doesn't matter what it is, we are to sacrifice to him. Now, there's all kinds of things in there that we could talk about. So we started up this mountain. We were all in a single file, and I had purposed one thing before I started. After the session, God moved me, and we were asked to not talk for a half hour, because this would take another hour to get up to the top. And it was 100 degrees, so think about it. But we were not to speak for a half hour, just meditate. And I had purposed, before I started, that I'm going to walk in the footsteps of the person in front of me. What I didn't know, behind me, they were struggling to keep up. And one person said, just walk in the footsteps of the person in front of you once, see what happens. And there was a few that thought he's kind of, what does that matter? And I'm telling you, it changed our lives going up that mountain that day. It was amazing. For that half hour, I barely looked up. I looked up once in a while to see where I'm going, but if you looked up too long, you would miss the step. And if you would watch his feet, if you would watch where he's walking in front of you and step where he stepped, you never missed a beat, unless he did. But he was very careful with where he was going. Brothers and sisters, can we follow Jesus, follow Christ as Paul did? Or Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. Can we be that example? When people follow us in our footsteps, their walk becomes better. Maybe not easier, but better. And isn't it, our walk is always, it's called aliyah, always up. up, up. If you want a better life, it's up. And you know, as we started out at the bottom of these mountains, you look up there and you say, ugh, that's going to be a journey. And then, when you get to the top, you go, wow, what a victory. How sweet it is to be victorious and get to the top. And if we're good leaders, that's what will happen to the flock you lead, to the children you lead, to the business you lead, to the neighbor, whatever it is. If you're a courageous leader, a leader that has a heart to influence and to serve, it will change everything around you. It's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. You're going to ask the leader and say, aren't there enough graves back in Egypt? Like one woman said in 2008, aren't there enough graves back in the United States that I had to come here and die? Because we had a rough hike one day, didn't we? You remember that one, Wayne, going back to Wadi the second time? Oh, my word, it was hard, but I knew that our leader was going to take us somewhere that would be awesome, and he did. And the noise they made, it would have been deafening in here tonight. You wouldn't have heard the music almost, it was that loud. I didn't know Mennonites and Amish people could make so much noise. It was amazing. It was a worship, and it was a huge waterfalls coming down. We stood under the waterfalls and we got drenched. But it was 2.5 miles back to the bus. It was the easiest 2.5 miles that I walked in a long time. We trusted our shepherd. He would take us somewhere. Not everybody got there. People were complaining, kvetch, kvetch, kvetch. But we had a courageous shepherd, and I was the facilitator in the back end, and he said, Joe, where are you at? I said, I'm not sure where I'm at. I'm way back somewhere yet. Well, push the people a little harder. And that's what we have to do sometimes, because the journey is worth it. Trust your shepherd. And we become under-shepherds. We can all be these under-shepherds, but there's always settings where you have leaders around you that you have to trust as well. And us leaders have to earn our trust as well. As we influence, as we walk the walk that God desires for us to be. Moses. Where was Moses? Well, I have a map here. Maybe I didn't put the map in then. The map was supposed to be in. I think I forgot it. Moses, the prophet shepherd. What was Moses' biggest thing? What did Moses do well? Moses transitioned well before he went up to Mount Nebo. It says that Joshua sat in his tent and he refused to leave because Joshua wanted to know everything that Moses was teaching. He didn't want to miss anything. So I ask you, do you have disciples in your tent? I've only had one disciple. Now I'm discipling more. But I wonder if that's something that's been broken in our Western world. It's so hard. How do you make disciples? Now we can make disciples, don't get me wrong. I'm being a little emphatic here. But try to understand what I'm saying. In the biblical times, take Jesus. Look at how can we have 12 disciples walking with us, training them every day? I don't know. But Moses did something well, and he trained Joshua so that when the last trip was taken up over the mountain and he looked down, this was before that. Let me just skip this quick. This is just the normal terrain in Jordan. Well, I shouldn't say normal. Oh, there is my map. As Moses was leading his people, I have to back up here a little bit though. Moses was leading his people. He was coming up through here. It's too bright. About not quite halfway up the Dead Sea, he wanted to come up a Wadi Zerah. And it was in the land of Moab, and they didn't let him through. Remember that? So he had come up all the way along that rugged terrain, almost halfway up the Dead Sea, and he had to turn around and go back. Now imagine being a leader. They're wondering, what's going on with you? He took them back. It doesn't say they complained. Did you think about it? Moses must have been doing something good. They had to go all the way down around and around the outside, and all the way up to the end of the Dead Sea. That's the journey God sometimes takes us. And sometimes your leaders take you somewhere you say, well, what are these guys doing? Check it out. Follow them. Go in their steps. Dig in. They're taking you somewhere. They have a vision. They have a goal. That's what Moses had. And Moses did well to transition. And I'm not sure what went through Moses' mind when he looked down over the plains to Jericho from Mount Nebo. As we climbed up Mount Nebo, we climbed up in about 1 minute intervals. So we didn't go together, you were by yourself, because he wanted you to think, what is the one most important thing for you at this time in your life? One of the most important things for me is transition, because I'm beginning to get a little older, and I want to transition. And I want to transition from here to here, and I want to transition from that to there. How do I do it? So to transition, you have to teach the person, or you have to train the person, or you have to disciple the person so he knows your voice, so that when you leave, your voice is still heard. It's exactly what happens to the shepherds. The voice of the Father is still heard. Those sheep still hear the voice of the Father because he trained the children. So your successor needs to be trained by you so that he knows your voice. Now, I've always thought when I do that, I will become less influential. It works just the opposite. Think about it. It works just the opposite. Shepherd leadership is driven by faith. Egypt-type leadership is driven by power and fear, by manipulation. Jesus said, and Jesus taught us, to lead like this, to love, to care. And I think that's what Moses did well. Somehow Moses did well in teaching Joshua how to walk with him. How are we walking? Someone's following us. Again, looking down over the plains of Jericho. And Moses was up there, and it says he could see all the land. And I'm sure it was clearer than it was the day we were there, because it's often hazy. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Maybe God gave him eyes to see the whole thing. But that was Moses. He transitioned well. And servant leaders transition well. Influence is the ultimate way to lead, I think. Influence is the ultimate way to lead. We do a lot of that at our factory over here. We practice influence. Influence means if I need to clean the toilets, I will do that. Actually, I'm scheduled on January 25th to help the cleaning ladies clean the bathroom and the kitchen. We as leaders are all taking turns to help them. That's influence. That's being literal about it. That's doing things, not just, you don't make other people do something you don't want to do. You help them do it at times. I wonder if that's what Moses did. What about David? I think Aaron the priest did. I think he was very influential. Again, looking down over Nebo. It's barren. It's a rugged land. It's a hard land. And God chose to bring his shepherds there. So let's go start looking for the great shepherd. What did the great shepherd do? I'm going to talk a little bit about David yet first, though. Let me talk to David. This is part of Samaria. We went the northern way, the ridge route, all the way up to almost to Dothan. Had a great ride up there. We went, actually there was disturbances going on the main highways. We couldn't go to main highway, so all of a sudden we're going these little roads, and I said, okay, what's going on? We don't go these little roads, not these little roads. I mean, they were not big enough for a bus. There was hairpin curves that I thought were going to go down over the edge because it was so sharp. We came around and wanted to go down this one. It was so steep and so sharp that the bus hit on the front. The nose of the bus hit on the road. We couldn't get, he had to turn the air compressor on and lift it up. Then he couldn't back up. It just spun out. And later I found out it was an amazing ride to see how Jesus walked through Samaria. And also this is where David was, where David influenced a lot. And David was caught, while David was up here, we went to Shiloh, Bethel. We know the story of Bethel, where Abraham came first. He built an altar, went to Egypt. Where did he come back to? Back to Bethel, to his altar again. House of God, Bethel. And so this is the land where David was at. It's beautiful land, grapes, still there. This was back in the biblical times. Not go too fast here. So David was an influencer as well. But he was the king. A king could influence and also use power, and so can leaders. Did David ever use power? Or did he always just influence? Let's see. See if we can find what David did. Come on. One day, we know the story. David goes and he faces the Philistine. That's when David used power against the enemy. Now, I don't think we use power that way. But there comes a time for justice. There comes a time that leaders have to say, no, this is how we're going to do it. There comes a time like that. But where is it? I can't give you that answer. Only God can give us that answer as we work together. David, an amazing man. David goes to Adullam after he had killed Goliath. We know what happened, Saul and all this. David goes to Adullam, and it says 400 people come to him, the down and outers, the ones in debt, the no good. The word Adullam, which is a cave in the Maresha South area that you saw places like, maybe I should go back, places like this. But there's caves down there. David went into that cave with 400 of those men that were around him. Adullam means justice of the people. Psalm 142 gives the heart of David. I cried to the Lord with my voice. With my voice to the Lord, I make my supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare him my trouble. Did God hear his cry? Yes, God heard his cry. And David rose up to be a mighty king. I think David was a great influencer as well. Oh, did he mess up? Yes, he did, just like all of us. But he was a great influencer. And he changed the world how they knew it. Actually, the kings of Israel, when they were anointed, were to be servant leaders. Not like other kings. They were to be servant leaders. So let's go to the great shepherd. Oops. Jesus, the great shepherd. This is I love to talk more about Jesus than anybody else. All the others were successors to him in a sense. But Jesus became the great shepherd. And to think where he went first after he was baptized, he goes out into the wilderness, in the Judean wilderness, out here, somewhere. And he's there for 40 days. We know the story. We know the temptations. And then he leaves and he goes to Galilee. Imagine him out there all alone. All alone. Again in the desert. Just where the children of Israel used to be. But it's only 40 days instead of 40 years, but the same scenario. The angels came and ministered to him, and it says that in Luke it says that he came back in the power of the Spirit, ready to do the work of God for his Father. So he had this confrontation. Never think it's going to be easy as a leader. Jesus didn't even have it easy. He was confronted with a man called Herod. Isn't it amazing how God brought these two together in such a time? One of the most powerful kings that Israel, or at least the puppet of Rome that Israel had, is Herod. Build these huge fortresses. Masada. The Herodian, Masada, Sepphoris, Machaerus, Jerusalem, Caesarea Martina. Beautiful cities. Huge cities, fortresses. His smallest one, I think, was 21 acres. Caesar's was 3 acres. His largest was 42 acres. Maybe Machaerus even bigger, which is on Jordan. So Jesus was confronted with a king that used power. Jesus used influence. God is sovereign. God is holy. But it seems when it comes to people, God uses influence. We can choose. He lets us choose. But through His Word, He is influencing us with how He taught, how He walked, how He confronted the Herods. They couldn't get away from Him. As a little baby, He was confronted with the Herod the Great, then Herod Archelaus when he went to Galilee. I love the story of how Jesus confronted them. Never afraid. Just walk right, never afraid. Now, I know He was God, but He gives us the power of the Spirit, doesn't He? We sang tonight, fill us with your Spirit. The same power. The power to influence. Are you influencing him? Just part of Herod's structure. This is Machaerus. And I'd like to read something here. There's a few more pictures that I have, and then I'm going to close. But I'd like to read something to you that I found by Ken Geyer. Thinking about Jesus, how He came, how He became the greatest king that ever lived, now not in the political world. He looked like a failure because he only had 12 when he left. But those 12 changed the world. So imagine if every pastor that has ever been ordained would just make 12 disciples that would go out and change the world. It's like taking 12 people from Holmes County and sending them to Vegas or to LA or to New York, and they changed the world. I know it's 2,000 years later, but think about that scenario. Imagine if we could influence something like that. So Jesus was confronted. Now here, it's hard to see, but you see, I don't know, maybe this will pick it up here. Right there, can you see that? There's caves there, there's sheepfolds there. Let me just give you the story of Jesus in a new way that I heard on this last trip, and it just has moved me. When Jesus was born, this could be, let's say this could be Bethlehem. Let's look at this one here. We know it was in Bethlehem somewhere. We know that Jesus was born close to somewhere where Herod the Herodian had built the Herodian, which was the tallest mountain in Judea. He built it up. I'm not sure how many feet he built it up, but he built it up, and then he put this circular building on top, and it was a magnificent place. And then Jesus is born. He comes to Nazareth. Now we know that was what was going on in Jesus. Jesus was born out of wedlock, or he was conceived out of wedlock. Well, now let's put on our human thinking. It would sound like, or it would seem like, she fell in sin and she had committed fornication, and so she was pregnant with a child. So imagine this whole scenario going on. And they're very religious people. And it says that there was no room for them in the inn. But imagine it this way. Would you think, because in the Tanakh, the Torah, you don't ever reject when it comes to bringing life to somebody. You never push somebody out. You would never push a pregnant woman away from the house, from the inn, which was a house of one of the relatives. You wouldn't do that. I can't imagine they would do that. But because of the situation, like we so often act as well, no, we can't, we're not going to have a part of this. He's not Joseph's son, so she can't come in here. But you can go to the stable. So they're sitting there. Imagine how distraught you would be if you're a young family expecting your first child, and Joseph and Mary knew things that other people didn't know, and they wouldn't believe it. Just like so often we do. We can judge so easily. So they're sitting there distraught. Imagine this. I'm not saying it's like this, but imagine this. Then the shepherds are coming in with their sheep. And they see this distraught couple sitting here, and they see exactly what's going on. And they may have said, you know what? You can have our sheepfold. We'll just take the sheep back out to the field for the night, and you can have our sheepfold. Wouldn't that be an amazing story? So listen to this, by Ken Geyer. Now let me just say this. Some of you might become a little uncomfortable. I hope you don't. We have been, in our Western world, so sanitized that we can't talk about real stuff sometimes. But imagine Jesus was born in a stable, in a sheepfold that was full of manure. None of us would ever choose to go there. And Mary didn't either. She had no choice. The birth would not be easy, either for the mother or for the child. Every royal privilege ended for the child at conception, talking about Jesus. A scream from Mary, knife through the calm of that silent night. Joseph returns breathless, water sloshing from the wooden bucket. The top of the baby's head had already pushed its way into the world. Sweat pours from Mary's contorted face as Joseph, the most unlikely midwife in all Judea, rushes to her side. The involuntary contractions are not enough, as Mary has to push with all her strength, as if God was refusing to come into the world without her help. Joseph places a garment beneath her, and with a final push and a long sigh, her labor is over. The Messiah has arrived. Elongated head from the constricted journey through the birth canal, light-skinned as his pigment, would take a few days, maybe even weeks, to surface. Mucus in his ears and his nostrils, wet and slippery from the amniotic fluid, the Son of the Most High God, unbiblically tied to a lowly Jewish girl. Our Messiah, our Jesus. The baby chokes and coughs. Joseph instinctively turns him over and clears out his throat, and then he cries. Mary bares her breast as she reaches for the shriveling child. She lays him on her chest. His helpless cries subside. His tiny head bobs around unfamiliar terrain, and Mary can feel his heart racing as he begins to nurse. This is the first thing the infant king learns. Our king. The first thing he learns. Deity nursing from a young maiden's breast. Would anything be more puzzling, more profound? Joseph sits exhausted, silent and full of wonder. The baby finishes and sighs. The divine word reduced to a few unintelligible sounds. And then, for the first time, his eyes fix on his mother's, deity straining to focus, the light of the world squinting. Now remember, this was in a sheepfold. This was not some pretty hospital bed. There were no suction cups and all of that to clean up the baby. Some water, probably not even warm water. But would anything be more puzzling, more profound? Deity straining to focus, the light of the world squinting, tears pool in Mary's eyes. She touches his tiny hands, hands that once sculptured the mountains and the valleys. The hands that sculptured the mountains and the valleys in the beginning of time now lay there, and she touched his tiny hands. Imagine the thought. His tiny hands clung to her finger. She looks up at Joseph, and through a watery veil, her soul is touched. He moves closer, cheek to cheek, to his betrothed. Together they stare in awe at the baby, whose heavy eyelids begin to close. It's been a long journey, and the king is tired. And so with barely a ripple of noise, God stepped into the warm lake of humanity, without protocol or pretension. Where you would have expected angels, there were only flies. Where you would have expected the head of state, there was only the bawling of sheep. Except for Joseph, there was none there to share her pain or joy. Yes, the angels were announcing the Savior's arrival, but only to a few blue-collar shepherds. And yes, a magnificent star shone in the sky to mark his birthplace, but only a few foreigners followed it. And thus, in the little town of Bethlehem, that one silent night, the royal of God's Son tiptoed quietly into the world. Herod had a kingdom of power. Jesus had a kingdom of influence. What about you and I? Are we influencers? It's okay. It's all right. Are we influencers, or how are we leading? I beg with us to lead like Jesus, like Moses, like Aaron the priest, like David the king. By influence. Let's stand. Father in heaven, as we lift our hands to you tonight, thank you for being a shepherd of influence, a shepherd that loves with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his strength, a shepherd that loves, a shepherd that cares. And I pray, Lord, tonight that we would be like that as his children. Whatever we do would be coming from your love. Whatever we say would be words that would empower other people and bring value to them. And what we do would be showing them the way to live so that the world can be a better place. Father, I pray for this congregation here. Pray that you would bless them mightily. Watch over them. Fill them with your Spirit. Give them wisdom and understanding. Father, nurture them as they sing, as they praise you, as they worship you, as they go about their way, as they sit in the houses. May your words be on the doorposts of their hearts, on all of our hearts, so that the words that you speak to us would be your words that would vibrate out over the world, and that influence would reign, the influence of love. Father, thank you for these pictures of these shepherds. Father, tonight I pray that you would help us to become the sacrifice. We are the temple of the living God. No, we can't sacrifice like Jesus. He's been the ultimate for us. Now we give our lives for him. May we leave this place being adamant and passionate to give our lives to him. In the name of our Messiah, Jesus, we pray. Amen. You may be seated.